Welcome to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point. I'm Li Chuyan, sitting in for Liu Xin. In this series, I look at stories that are making headlines around the world and talk to my guests to compensate for the missing pieces of the puzzle. So join us in real time by sending us your comments or questions via the CGTN page on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, as well as Weibo. And if you're watching this on live, on the CGTN app, email us at thepointwithlx@cgtn.com. Let me know what you think. We start our live streaming every Friday at 11 a.m. Beijing time, so do get in touch, and we might just read out your comments. And this week, we're doing something a little different. We're now walking through a COVID-19 timeline, focusing on three voices: China, the World Health Organization, and the U.S. President Donald Trump. What did what when is starting to matter more and more as accusations against China and the WHO for misleading the world and covering up key information run rampant. And the Trump administration, which is grasping the severity of its crisis management, has been leading the charge. So let's set the record straight today by looking at the facts. And since we don't know who patient zero was, we will start with what's on record for what China did to tell the world what was going on as new information emerged. On December 31st, China reported a cluster of cases of pneumonia in Wuhan, Hubei province. A few days later, on January 3rd, China alerted, and on January 5th, the WHO reported the cases on its social media account. On January 12th, China shared the genetic sequence of COVID-19 with the WHO. And then, on January 20th, a groundbreaking moment. China's leading epidemiologist, Dr. Zhong Nanshan, confirmed a game-changing discovery. Take a listen.
There are now confirmed instances of human-to-human transmission.
And the next day, the U.S. reported its first confirmed case. On January 23rd, a day the world will remember, and an alarm bell for all the world to hear: the lockdown of Wuhan, a city of 11 million people, the largest ever lockdown in human history at that point. The severity of the situation was not lost on the U.S., which started evacuating its citizens from the region. But instead of addressing how the U.S. would manage its own situation and prepare for what was clearly a highly contagious disease, some were preoccupied with other things. Let's take a listen now to what the U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross had to say.
I think it will help to accelerate the return of jobs to North America, some to U.S., probably some to Mexico as well.
And by late January, it was becoming clear that this wasn't just a problem in China. On the same day, Ross made his remarks on January 30th. The WHO declared COVID-19 a public health emergency of international concern. The WHO kept waving a big red flag.
This is the time to attack the virus while it is actually manageable, small number of cases in the rest of the world. We're at a decisive point. This virus is not influenza. With the right measures, it can be contained. The situation as a pandemic does not change WHO's assessment of the threat posed by the virus.
And despite distress signals coming from around the world, the WHO's warnings and even urgent memos from his own team of advisors, Trump refused to listen. And in fact, he continued to misinform the American public over and over again.
A lot of people think that goes away in April with the heat, as the heat comes in. Typically that will go away in April. We're in great shape though. Because of all we've done, the risk to the American people remains very low. I really think, Doctor, you want to treat this like you treat the flu, right? But we have done an incredible job. We're going to continue. It's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle. It will disappear. Relax. We're doing great.
We're doing great. Well, it wasn't until March 16th, almost 2 months after the U.S. confirmed its first case, that Trump announced a set of social distancing guidelines that he called 15 days to slow the spread. And on that same day, the number of reported cases in the U.S. rose above 7,000. But testing had really just begun. And as the reported cases skyrocketed across the country, Trump started to realize he'd made some deadly mistakes. And to cover up his administration's mismanagement, he turned to his well-worn playbook and started looking for others to blame, like using the term Chinese virus.
I would like to begin by announcing some important developments in our war against the Chinese virus.
Why do you keep calling this the Chinese virus? There are reports of dozens of incidents of bias against Chinese Americans in this country. Your own aide, Secretary Azar, says he does not use this term. He says ethnicity does not cause the virus. Why do you keep using this? A lot of people say it's racist.
It's not racist at all, no, not at all. It comes from China. That's why. It comes from China. I want to be accurate. WHO, that's the World Health Organization, receives vast amounts of money from the United States. They seem to be very China-centric.
And on April 15th, Trump announced his halting funding to the WHO while a review is conducted. And the U.S. isn't out of the woods yet. Well, the point here is not to rub salt into the injuries, of course. The U.S. is clearly under enough duress. And having been through our own virus trauma here in China, we understand. But it's also important to point out that the U.S. government could have made very different decisions to change the course of the virus within its own borders. And those decisions had nothing to do with China or the WHO. Facts don't lie, and dates don't deceive. So let's be clear here. The writing was on the wall. This is an unprecedented disaster for humankind, and we need solidarity and unity to fight the virus. Anger and blame would only turn a natural disaster into a man-made catastrophe. And if the U.S. government keeps finger-pointing, it will only make things worse. And I think we can all agree here. People are already suffering too much. Now let's take a quick break, and when we come back, I'll ask my guests why this timeline is important, the impact of lost time, and what to expect next. Stick around.
Making sense of the overwhelming wave of information means cutting through the noise to shine a light on the heart of the story and making room for new perspectives. True understanding means the ability to see events from more than one side. I'm Liu Xin, and this is The Point.
Joining us now live are James Chau from Hong Kong, our former colleague and now the host of the China Current. Welcome. And Professor Rick Dunham joining us from D.C. He's the co-director of Global Business Journalism Program at Tsinghua University. Welcome. And also Dr. Zhiwei from Nanjing Center for Public Health Research, Medical School of Nanjing University. Thank you so much for joining us, all gentlemen. So we just presented a timeline for the break. Dunham, let me bring you into the conversation here. What do you think? What do you make of what's been said here, and what stand out to you the most when it comes to this timeline?
Well, I take exception to one thing that you said when you talk about America being slow. I don't think you can say America. I think you can say Donald Trump and the Trump administration. Governors took this very seriously, particularly Washington State, where the first cases came into America from China. They clamped down early, and they have flattened the curve. And so the problem is in the White House. You had Donald Trump not taking it seriously. You had Donald Trump talking about this as a hoax, talking about it as media misinformation, and that really is the problem. Yes, there were mistakes. The WHO made mistakes early, particularly its tweet about the lack of person-to-person transmission. They said that they had been told that by the Chinese government. Well, that was wrong. But Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, a Democratic senator, said today that withholding money from the WHO for something like that is like shooting at an ambulance. It's trying to save people because you didn't like the way it responded to an earlier call. So I think what Donald Trump is doing right now is very controversial within the U.S. It's been repudiated by countries around the world. But I really don't think you should say America.
Yeah, and the director of China Center for Disease Control, as we understand, personally called the director of U.S. Centers for Disease Control on January the 3rd. Dr. Wu, let me bring you into this. Do we know, or what do we know about what's been said on that phone call? And what do you think? What accounts for the gap in time between the phone call and concrete action steps from the Trump administration?
Well, actually, if you look at the timeline, I think by end of January it was very clear that how the disease was transmitted and what the virus it is, and also the danger, the severity of this epidemic. Everything is actually reported to WHO and the U.S. CDC. There is apparently quite frequent contact between the Chinese CDC and the American authority. If you look at the very early stage on the trying to identify the viruses, actually, I think at this time it's already very quick. If you look back in year 2003, when the SARS happened, actually, it took 4 months to get a sequence. When the MERS happened in it took about 3.5 months to publish the sequence. But this time for the COVID-19, it only took about 1 month and 5 days, which actually published on January 11th. So by end of January, actually, in the scientific, all the major scientific publications, there were 54 of them, and 28 was published in the Chinese journal. So basically, by end of January, all the informations are in the public domain. So I don't understand. I don't know whether the American authority want more to know and to take the action in containing this disease.
And Professor Dunham, earlier you said it's not that America responded slowly, it's Trump or his administration responded slowly. And interestingly, Trump reportedly received a warning not just from the WHO and China, but from his own administration. For example, Trump's White House advisor, Peter Navarro, wrote an urgent memo on January 28th warning the virus' potential toll. But what factors has Trump been weighing on trying to figure out which actions to take? What do you think is going on in that decision-making there?
Well, there is so much chaos within the White House and the Trump administration. Peter Navarro sent a memo, and there were a chain of emails that talked about something they called Red Dawn, which was a Cold War movie, and that was warning that there could be very serious outbreak in the United States. The president says he never read it. Well, we don't know if that's true or not, but he should have read it. The CDC was warning the White House. Governors were warning the White House. Doctors were warning the White House. The WHO repeatedly warned the world. So there's not really any excuse for not taking it more seriously.
James, did the media miss an opportunity to warn the American public that the virus was coming their way?
Look, myself included, we like to put a lot of weight on the media and to put a lot of responsibility on them. And of course, the media is part of the whole of society approach. But as the professor said there very clearly, I think that there's an onus on the part of governments to deliver on for their own people. I'd like to take the heat off a little bit just off the United States, because I don't want my comments to be framed purely against one country, because they're not. We all love each other as countries and as people. That's the whole point of what WHO has been talking about in terms of a solidarity response fund, in terms of coming together, in terms of being unified. For every moment that people and governments particularly try to look to others to name blame or to finger point, which is what we know held up that resolution from being adopted at the UN Security Council, because they insisted on the virus being named after its alleged place of origin. None of that helps. Right now, there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in sometimes single countries who are crying out for help. And the best way that we can respond is to push on, is to ensure that our health workers are properly protected, that they're given the conditions to work properly. And we haven't even talked about Africa or Latin America, where the health burden tends to be a lot greater, and especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where it's greatest in the world. We hear this morning that 1 million additional testing kits are on the way to 50+ countries in that region, which is so uplifting. We know that the Global Citizens WHO concert is going to be led by people like Lady Gaga and Stevie Wonder. Music alone isn't going to save lives, but the solidarity and the humanity that it exudes will, of course. So I think that in terms of countries, No country today, including China, can say that they did it absolutely right. And for countries like China, countries like Norway and New Zealand, I think they have a lot to look to WHO and to the international multilateral system, which is what has pulled us through the worst of this crisis. If you think it's bad now, imagine a world without the UN and without WHO. You would have a virus that spreads so fast, so deeply, and with such ruthlessness that every single continent right now will be in much deeper trouble than it is today.
So Dr. Wu, this blame game James was talking about, how are you looking at it from afar? You know, this finger pointing between the U.S. and China, when the world's two biggest economic powers should really be working together to fight this virus?
Well, actually, I definitely agree that, we all should, cooperate and work together to fight the virus. But unfortunately, the U.S. Trump administration, essentially, I mean, if you look at the entire January and March, they're pointing fingers and cut off the travel between China and other countries. But basically, what you can see is that the Trump administration hasn't really done much in preparing for the worst scenario. And if you look back, what they said in the news briefing, and he playing down the severity of the disease, and he says that it's going to be under control, by April, and the virus will be gone. I mean, that's the real problem. Seems to be that the whole scenario is really driven by some kind of hidden agenda. I mean, what I can say is basically for the re-election campaign, he needs market support, and he needs his approval ratings.
Yeah, and Trump's decision now to withdraw funding from the WHO is also drawing a lot of criticism. I mean, James, you have actually worked with the WHO for a very long time. What's at stake now by withdrawing funding in the middle of the pandemic?
I think, there are a number of countries that have indicated, and a number of groupings have indicated that they're willing to step in, not because it's the right thing to do necessarily, but because it's a necessary thing to do. We're in the midst of the biggest peacetime emergency in modern history, and yet you choose now. You've seen very strong statements from the G20, which have just announced a debt suspension plan for 77 countries that covers around $12 billion US. You've seen the G7 come together as a group. Well, 6 of the G7 countries come together as a group. You're seeing a lot of activity over in New York in the terms of those drafting resolutions for the UN Security Council. You've got elder statesmen like Helen Clark and Gordon Brown coming together. And these are not just names and places and institutions. Real things are happening right now. I see a lot of hope for what's coming together. I think, though, that what we really need to be focused on is away from the geopolitics, is to think about the families, the communities, the regions, the countries, and to extend to one another as neighbors. We, at the end of the day, are all going to be subjected to this virus in the same ways, but also with differing magnitudes. And we haven't even spoken about those who are truly vulnerable, not only in the developing world and forcibly displaced, like the refugees and the migrants. Together, that's 300 million people, about 7.8 billion in humanity. But what about those who are suffering from domestic abuse at home, those who can't go to school, those who did go to school and were therefore guaranteed one nutritious meal a day, and now that's gone? What about the parents who are in lockdown, who are not able to earn a wage for their family? What about here in Hong Kong, one of the richest cities in the world, and right outside my window, people are queuing up for free food because the entire ability to earn a wage in one household has almost been shot overnight. I still think there is a way out, and I think together as a world we're going to come through this. I really do think so. We've come through greater things in the past.
Yeah, and Professor Dunham, your thoughts on this?
Business leaders like Bill Gates have spoken out very strongly and have put their money where their mouth is. I think governors have taken this seriously and are trying to do something. Unfortunately, we're caught up in a political year, a presidential election year. Donald Trump had been running on his economic record. Obviously, the coronavirus has destroyed the global economy. He can't run on that, so he has decided running against China, running against globalism, running against global organizations like the WHO is his ticket to re-election. It's unfortunate, but it's a reality, and we're going to be seeing it over the next few months.
All right, let's go to our viewers' comments. We've got some comments from our viewers. This is from Facebook. Latita Chakraborty says, how Corona has tied us together, total globally, having same thinking, same worries, everything all the same way. James, your reaction to it?
I think, the way that person expressed it is beautiful, and it also brought up another thing to my mind. I was speaking to some of my friends who are racial justice advocates and civil rights activists in the United States. They describe this as a savage, cruel, disgusting disease. That's the only thing that we should be angry about right now. That's where all our focus should be on. We're against this virus. We're not against each other at all.
And Professor Dunham?
I agree with that. In the United States, this virus has hit some of the most vulnerable populations, and minority groups have been hit harder because of pre-existing health conditions and because of disparities in health care in poorer areas and in areas with larger minority populations. So again, I think people are coming together. Unfortunately, the noise is sometimes drowns out the strong feeling of Americans coming together and being in solidarity with other nations that are fighting to try to defeat the coronavirus.
Yeah, this should really be a time to bring out the best of who we are, to rise above our own self-interest as we, mankind, in this all together, right? Yeah, here's another comment from our viewers. Let's take a look at it. This is from Jennifer Bond on Facebook. She says, why is it now Trump's country and people were infected the most now? This is his own work, but he twisted it around and blamed China. Professor Dunham.
Well, again, that is the case. He has blamed China. I do think what you said before is very important about the lost month of February from the federal level. The states that were hardest hit, which at that point was Washington State, California, and New York, were desperately trying to get protective equipment. We're desperately trying to get testing. They could not do that. There's certain things that only the national government in the United States can do. I think right now what we need to worry about is dual. The first is health care. And in the United States, the biggest failure in terms of health care is the lack of testing to identify people with the virus. The second big issue is tracking. So that you can isolate people if you know that they've had it, or if they've already had it, that you can get antibodies and help with solving the problem. The second issue is economic. That's a bigger challenge for everyone, and I think globally what we need to do is come together. If this ends up with a lot of nationalism, xenophobia, and trade barriers, it's going to be very hard because we have a global economy and a global supply chain. So I know people around the world are going to be upset with Donald Trump over the next few months. It's inevitable. But I think that we really do have to focus on the challenge that's immediate for everyone, not the rhetorical challenge, but the challenge of fighting coronavirus in every country around the world.
And hopefully we could see more coordinated efforts, not only in China and the United States, but also in countries all over the globe. Thank you. That was well said. James Chau joining us from Hong Kong, the host of China Current. Professor Dunham, Rick Dunham from D.C., Washington, D.C., co-director, Global Business Journalism Program at Tsinghua University. And earlier joining us was Dr. Zhiwei from Nanjing Center for Public Health Research, Medical School of Nanjing University. Thank you very much for all your analysis, perspectives. That's all the time we have. We're going to have to leave it there. And that does it for this edition of Headline Buster. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye for now. Take care.